Hi, this is Laura Karpman, and you're listening to the Sound Architect Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Sound Architect Podcast. I am your host, Sam Hughes, and today I'm joined by composer Laura Karpman. Thanks for joining me today, Laura. How are you?
My pleasure. I'm great.
Excellent. So before we dive straight into one of your recent projects that I want to talk to you about, how did your career in music first begin?
Well, I think it began before I began. Basically, my mother decided when she was pregnant that she wanted me to be a composer. So I just came out, and there you go. No, not quite. She was a painter and a sculptor, and she just loved music. And so she would say, and I don't know that I agree with her, but she would say that music was the highest art form, and I think, she wanted, for some reason, me to do it.
Oh, right. So you had a lot of encouragement early on then.
Basically, when my parents got a piano, I kind of went over and just started playing it. So that was really the beginning of all of it.
Nice. So you've been composing for over 30 years, is that right?
Well, I've been doing it in the music. I've been composing my entire life.
Yeah.
But I've been doing film scoring for about, this is my 30th anniversary. Yeah.
Wow, congratulations. That's amazing.
To survive this long in such a crazy business is
yeah, it's pretty impressive.
It's funny because when I noticed that it was 30 years, I went back and forth about whether to be kind of public about it, and then I thought, God, it's something to be really proud of,
Yeah, it is. And I have what might be quite a bit of a tricky question for you, or it might not, but I'm really curious, for someone who's worked in the industry that long, how do you think the role of a composer has evolved over that amount of time, and how has the industry evolved?
No, well, it's just changed tremendously. It's changed in every conceivable way. I mean, the technology is radically transformed.
Yeah.
So, when I started, people were still recording scores on, 2-inch tape and 4-track and all of that, and cutting, those were really the bad old days, I have to say.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Sampling technology is so radically improved. Recording technology has so radically improved. Now, with all of that, there are, as with any kind of change, there are good things and bad things about it. I mean, the good things about it is there are things that we can do now that were inconceivable when I got going in the business. But the bad news is, there's something wonderful about showing up on a stage every week and there's an orchestra sitting there. So we're missing that, That's not to say that it's not done, and it certainly is done in some television and certainly for larger features, but there's, there is that missing, every television team, every commercial, recorded with an orchestra. Now, what you also have is a huge amount of content now. And so
definitely.
that has exploded really in the past 3 years. So there is lots of work, and it's great to be experienced at doing it. So, we're working constantly, and that's a very, very good thing.
Yeah.
I am always grateful to be a working composer.
Yeah, I can imagine it. And it's a tough industry, isn't it? It's not the easiest to kind of stay in or even break into.
It's not the easiest to break. I think everybody is always breaking in, which is sort of funny, maybe with the exception of 10 people. But I think there's this sense of there's always some new thing to do. There's always something that you haven't done. There's always something that you want to do and you haven't done. And I think that's what also makes it a super exciting business.
Yeah, 100%. It definitely keeps you on your toes, eh?
Yeah, it does indeed.
So I would like to talk about one of your most recent projects that you've scored for. Let's talk about Why We Hate, which is a 6-episode documentary executive producer Steven Spielberg, if I believe.
Yes, indeed. And Alex Gibney is the great documentary director.
So how did you first get involved with the project?
That was a lovely thing where I saw Steven at an event, and we had worked together on Taken a long time ago. It was, like 18 years ago or something. And he had mentioned the project.
Already.
Yeah. And And then Daryl Frank gave me a call, and and then they reached out to Sam Pollard and Gita Gandabir, who are the sort of fingernails dirty directors on the project. I mean, they really got in there and did it. And I met with them, and we talked about stuff, and then they hired me. So it was a really nice kind of synergy coming from a number of places. And of course, it's a topic that is urgently important.
Oh, especially today, yes.
Yeah, no, I mean, unfortunately, it continues to be urgently important, unceasingly urgently important. It's one of those things where where you hope it's something in the past, and yet it never seems to get there.
Yeah.
So, it was something I was really, really motivated to work on.
Yeah, I can imagine. And where did you draw your inspiration for something like that when you began?
I'll tell you a little story. Erica Sashin, who was who was an EP on it as well, and was the fingernails dirty kind of person who was in there, called me one weekend, and she said, they were working on the main title, and she said, they want to cut it. They want it to be just a short thing, and Steven's not hearing. They had temp music in there, and it's not hearing what he wants, and he wants something really that deals with the human condition. And I said, let me do something. I said, and I'm a really fast composer. Like, I can write 10 minutes or orchestral music a day.
Well, I can imagine by now, yeah, it must be insanely good.
But I said, for this, I need 2 days. I need 2 or 3 days just to sort of think about what this theme could possibly be. And I will guarantee you that once it's done, that you won't have to cut the main title. And then I went for a walk, and I live on the beach, which is another privilege of my life.
Nice.
So I went for a walk on the beach, and I had this idea that I sang into the phone that was this just melody that just never ended. And it went around the circle of fifths, which is, a very, I mean, there's nothing there. Every composer in the history of classical music and pop music has used the circle of fifths. From Off Leaves to to anything by Bach. So there's nothing nothing like crazy, like, oh my God, what a brilliant idea. But there was this idea of just going around in a circle, and I wanted to write a simple melody, but I wanted to write something that was really harmonically complex underneath it, because that to me is a real, that's the essence of what all of this is, right? There's something so simple about it, and yet there are complex explanations. And so that theme, and it's not the only theme in the show, but that theme and the way that I kind of thought about it, I think became the inspiration for everything. And also just, like, we had like a string quartet come here every week, and I mean, we recorded some orchestral strings as well and other instruments, but I don't know, everybody, like, I have a pool of musicians that I use regularly, and everybody kind of stepped up their game for this one. And I mean that there was an elevation that happened to whatever I wrote when it was one of those projects. It was just a blessed project.
Yeah, and I can imagine that everyone was really into the content as well.
Everybody cared in a way that is just, I mean, we care about everything, but there was something special about this. I will say that.
Yeah, I can see that, especially with what the documentary was following.
Yeah, well, it's just looking at the most essential issue of, humanity, really.
Yeah, exactly. So how did it, I mean, obviously, apart from the obvious, musically, how did it differ from previous projects and stand out to you, apart from this special feeling that you got?
I think that there are some projects where you can be your total self, and this was one of them for me. I could be my total self.
Awesome.
And I think that, like, I feel like I always bring a part of myself to everything, no matter what it is. But they wanted intensity. They wanted dissonance. They wanted modernism. They weren't looking for something easy musically.
Right. Okay.
And so, they weren't looking for ambient. They weren't looking for pads. They weren't looking, you know what I mean?
Yeah, they weren't looking for generic background music for this or anything. They were looking for something meaningful.
They were looking for something meaningful. And I tell you, it's funny because I think in everything, it's not just documentary film. I think in narrative film as well. You know, and in television and all these mediums, there's always this. There's always this, like, when is the music in the background? When is it in the foreground? And then there's this kind of middle place where it's kind of like where, like, people who understand, like I mentioned John Williams earlier, you know, people understand that you can write complex and intense music and mix it properly, and it can exist under dialogue in between places. It doesn't have to be, you know, simple to fall under dialogue and to fall under narration or interviews or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's, I don't know, it was just one of those things where, and like we went back and forth about all of that, like how thick is it? Where does it go too far? And I think, you know, we talked a lot also about redemption and hope, because that's the other side of it. I mean, you want hope. You want to feel there's another, like there's something on the other side, you know?
Yeah, of course, definitely. And, you know, this isn't your first documentary, of course. You've done quite a few, haven't you?
Yeah, I do a lot. And in fact, when we talk about sort of burgeoning fields, that is a place where I'm working a ton. I would say, well, I mean, every year is different, but this year it's been all year. I mean, it's like I'm working on 2 massive ones right now. And I mean, I'm just thinking about it, like what, yeah, I mean, this year for me has been the year of the documentary. I've done a ton of them. So it's really, there is a lot, and that's a wonderful thing, because of course, you know, these are issue-driven pieces that people care about them. And I think, at least what I'm seeing in my career, that people are interested in really having a big musical voice in them. I'm working on one right now called Pray Away, about the Exodus movement, for gay people who were trying to become ungay, let's say, you know. And they interview these incredible people, all of whom were, you know, extremely charismatic, who were, you know, gay and then became quote unquote straight in order to, you know, fit into a Christian lifestyle and to fit into what they thought was right at the time.
Oh my God.
And the regrets that these people have. And I mean, anyway, the point is that, you know, they want real music on this thing. They want complex music. They want big music. And it's it's a pleasure. Even if you look at like the documentaries that, you know, we're right now in award season, and, you know, who's putting themselves out there, and even score wise, you have Jeff Beal with Biggest Little Farm, you have Jocelyn Pook with Kingmaker. You've got these major documentaries that have significant scores, and composers are, you know, trying to get them into the conversation. I think that's a very, very interesting thing.
Well, yeah, definitely. And why not? They should be.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and I'm curious, because with documentary scoring, like with a short film or a game or a movie in general, you tend to try and influence the viewer's emotions in some way, right? You're trying to kind of heighten the excitement, or, you know, heighten the fear, or something along those lines, or add to it, and be in a subtle way. But in a documentary, it must be so tricky. I mean, obviously not for you, you've done loads now, but I'm curious what it is to like toe the line of subtle and not over dramatizing, but also giving the feeling of what it's like, and not, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I believe me, I really know what you mean.
Yeah, exactly.
I really know what you mean, more than you even know what you mean.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'll tell you, it is an ongoing head scratcher, because I believe that when you put a cut in a piece of verite, when you have somebody edit that, or when you actually even shoot it, if you put up a camera, then you're striking a point of view. So I think for music to be neutral, it doesn't make sense to me. Like you need to use music as a tool to lead or to support, the same way you do with narrative film. Now, having said that, sometimes I'm working on something right now that shall remain nameless, because I'm just like, ugh. Sometimes it scares them, and sometimes you need to really back away from that, and sometimes just want a tone or something that stays out of the way, and those are jobs that are way less fun for me and satisfying.
I can imagine, especially creatively.
It's creatively not. it's just not satisfying, and you
Yeah.
feel like you're just kind of doing a job. But I'm grateful for that too, Sam. I mean, like I said, to be a working composer, to actually be able to make a living as an artist is a privilege. And so I just keep that in my mind during those tough times. And you happen to catch me on one like yesterday when I got a lot of notes on a project where I'd written music that I was really pleased with, that it just was not flying. And so I had to redo it with more of that neutral, staying out
Mm.
of the way stuff. And it doesn't make you happy, but it's a job that needs to get done, and so I will do it.
No, no, of course. And, of course, every project is, you're always grateful for every project. But no, I'm glad we could talk about it because I've often thought, because, obviously, like I said before, you don't want to over dramatize. But then if people are literally just using filler, then, you do feel bad for the composer and wonder why they don't just use library music.
They could, I mean, I'm recording a project for a library this week, which is actually another really interesting story that I want to tell you about.
Sure, yeah.
But some libraries are doing some really good things and stuff, and I don't mean to cast aspersions, but I mean, even with the simplest music, it's thematic, and there are things that tie to each other, and there's sounds that go together. So, with library music, you're dealing with and sometimes a very fine cue to cue approach, and there's not the architecture of an entire score. So even if I'm working with just tone and, let's say, a piano melody, which is what this other thing is proving out to be, there's
Yeah.
still a piano melody, and the tones are still tones that I've created that are custom for the project.
Of
So
course.
but what you're saying is true. I mean, when you hire a composer to do something, you're hiring somebody to have a sense of the architecture of the entire project. And even if it's simple, the score still has to have that architecture.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. And thank you. That's been actually quite eye-opening. I wasn't really sure how that used to go with documentaries or how it went now. So, what was the biggest challenge of working on Why We Hate?
Oh, I think just seeing those images. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, that must be tough.
yeah, I mean, every time my kid would walk in the room, I'd have to turn off the TV, and
Yeah.
it's hard to live with that. But it was an education, and I think the sort of the thing about it that struck me the most was the way that how remarkable people are, and how there are a few people who just go to this incredible dark place, and then they get themselves out against all possible odds,
Yeah.
and that's amazing. But you just look at images like that. I mean, it's just, you don't, and it's real. It's
Yeah,
not
that's the hardest part, right?
during a horror film. I mean, this is all real. This is just, humans doing bad things to each other for no good reason.
Yeah, which is, horrifying more than a horror film to me, to be honest.
Truly.
Now, obviously, it's hard to say this in a way for something like this, but your musically wise, what was your kind of proudest moment on this project, if you can say?
I think the main title.
Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty great story about how that came around.
I think it was hard, and it was really, I felt like it was one of my best themes that I've done. It felt like a real theme. It felt like it captured it felt like it was worthy of a Spielberg project. It was, and I was proud of it. And he liked it too. I mean, he loved it. And so that, coming from somebody like that means a lot.
Yeah, that's pretty huge.
He loves music, and he knows music,
Yeah, which is always a great bonus in a director, right? An executive producer.
Yeah, it's true.
So you mentioned a minute ago that you were working on some library music. Just before we move on, I kind of want to see more about that.
Well, this is a funny story. So last May, as kind of a favor, some gentlemen came to my studio that were from a music library, just to kind of, I have a gorgeous studio on the beach, and they were sent over by Universal, and they were in town meeting people, and they're London based, and so I just thought, okay, well, it's nice, we'll have a meeting, and whatever. And I wasn't that interested in doing library music.
Yeah.
And they said, we love to work with artists, and we're looking for interesting projects. And I just thought, okay, great, And probably 2 weeks later, a woman came into my studio. She is a two-time Academy Award Pakistani filmmaker. Her name's Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy, and she's made 2 documentary shorts that have won Oscars, which is extraordinary. She's not even 40. She has 2 Oscars, and
Oh,
her
wow.
she makes films about social change.
Yeah.
And she was sent to me by 2 people, and she was in the process of she had formed the first animation studio in Pakistan, and she was making an animated short. I think it's about 14 minutes long, about child marriage in Pakistan and all over the world. And it was she felt the best way to get the message out that this is not the right thing to do to children was through creating this animated project with no dialogue.
All right. Okay.
It's all music and animation. And she said, but we have no money to record. And I thought, bingo. So I called the guys from Audio Network, who were the music library people who came through. And I said, listen, I've got something that maybe you might be interested in funding. And long story short, they funded the entire project.
Oh,
I went
wow.
to Abbey Road and recorded it. And it's, now in awards contention, whatever that means at this point, but it's a beautiful, beautiful film called Sitara that Darla Anderson is executive producing. She was producer on Cars and tons of Pixar movies. And then this Thursday at Abbey Road, they're recording the library version of the cues. So basically, I took the cues from Sitara, it was beautiful, and its music tells the entire story, and then fashioned them into music, with the direction of Andrew Sennix, who's the head guy over there, and fashion them into library music, so then they can add this to their library for kind of children's music and create an album out of it. So I just thought that was just the most wonderful use of just a library and social justice and doing something good for the world, and something that I hope will benefit them financially ultimately once the record gets out there, and something that I think a lot of people will see all over the world. Gucci has gotten involved, and they're creating a whole program. Chime for Change is involved, and so it's a very, very, very a very cool thing, and it was my first foray, and it was hardly library music because it was a film, but then it became library music because these guys at Andrew and the company were so very generous in supporting this project.
That is an amazing story. I have to say, that's absolutely wonderful.
I know, it really is, isn't it?
Yeah, and I've never heard anything like that before.
Yeah, it was just like everybody doing good.
So wholesome and amazing.
Kind of why we hate, and just that, there's an example of people investing money into something they believed in it, and just doing something for the reason of just being good. And I really am grateful to them, as is Sharmeen.
Yeah, and like you said, the story is quite a powerful message in the animated short as well, isn't it?
It's incredible. It's great.
And so I have kind of an interesting question for you here, and I hope you don't mind me asking. So you've worked on all these documentaries, and they cover God knows how many different topics, and you come across things like Why We Hate, which surely must be quite taxing emotionally as well as mentally. So first of all, how do you decide what projects you want to work on, and from that perspective? And secondly, how do you make sure that you remain okay after watching all of these, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I choose projects where I feel like I will be able to have a voice, and sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't. Mostly it does. Especially in documentary, where now I have kind of, where people know my work, and they'll call me for a specific reason. How do you recover from it? It's funny because it hits you in funny and odd ways. Like, you feel tired and you don't really know why, or, you know, that kind of a thing, but I think mostly, I thought about it, there's this one scene in Why We Hate where there are 2 monkeys who apparently share 98% of their DNA with humans. And so they're both given green grapes, which they love, right? They just love them. They're in side-by-side cages. And then the monkey on the right continues to be fed green grapes, and the monkey on the left gets cucumbers. And the monkey on the left just goes crazy.
Yeah.
And because it's had the good stuff and now it's getting the bad stuff, but it goes crazy because it's not fair.
Yeah.
And that's something I thought a lot about. And I've thought a lot about in terms of my own advocacy and social justice work for women in the film scoring industry. And I've taken that scene and thought about it a lot. I've thought about, not only the lack of opportunity for women in my business, but also how that affects us, and I thought about those monkeys, and not that people are going crazy and banging the cages, but we might be.
I mean, some people are.
Some people, just that feeling of like how you deal with jealousy, like the sense of social media, or this, like, because the other monkey was exposed to what the good monkey was getting. You know what I mean? So
yeah, it was like in his face.
Like, I'll take something like that with me, and I'll think about it in terms of other aspects of my life, not only just in terms of, the topics of the show, which were, like huge kinds of genocides and stuff like that, but also in the small ways, like how does a small unfairness or an unconscious bias influence you? How does it create your behavior? How does it influence your friendships? How does social media influence your day? I don't know.
Yeah, it definitely gives you a lot to think about.
I took Facebook off my phone.
Yeah, that's a good call.
And so it was like, after that, I decided I would check it every once in a while, but I took it off my phone because I thought it's not fun.
No.
It's not a place where positive things happen mostly.
Yeah, and that's the downside to social media, isn't it? Like, obviously it brings a lot of good things, but there's a lot of downsides to it as well.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think it creates, it creates an equivalence and a lack of equivalence, but it does give you kind of access and other people access to you, which is really a good thing. So it's hard to navigate, but so it's kind of a non-answer to your question, but it's the answer in that things that when you work on something like this that's so intelligent, that's so well done, it influences your life in different kinds of ways than you might expect.
Yes, I think that's a very good way of putting it. So, what lies in the future for you now that you are able to talk about?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that I am able to talk about and one thing that I'm not, so I'll be very surreptitious about that.
Okay, sounds great.
I've written a piece in celebration of suffrage in the United States, the 19th Amendment, and the 100th anniversary is in 2020. It's crazy, like 100 years since women were given the right to vote. And it's a piece that looks at the relationship between Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And that I'm super proud of, and I think that's going to be great. The scoring project, which I'm not allowed to talk about, I will say is going to be an amazing series for Disney Plus. That's going to turn everything you thought you knew about a certain subject completely upside down. How's that for being surreptitious?
I love it.
It's going to be something the fans are going to go absolutely crazy for.
Oh, wow. That sounds very exciting and interesting.
It's going to be great.
Well, I have to say that's all of my questions, but it has been an absolute genuine pleasure having you on the show and a really, really insightful interview. Thank you very much for being on the show with me.
Thank you for reaching out, Sam.
Absolutely loved it. And thank you to everyone out there listening, and I hope to see you all soon.